Running a business in Philadelphia takes a lot. It takes strong relationships, unique insight, and inspired leadership. It takes staying in the know and making the most of every opportunity. Everything it takes is everything you'll find at CCPA. A resource for business support, a chance to hear from experts in their field and get up close and personal with city leaders. An insider's guide to what's happening and what's next in Philadelphia. With CCPA, business is personal.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are so appreciative that Police Commissioner Outlaw could be with us today. And thank you all for joining us and being a part of this important conversation. I'm Suzette Munley, the president of CCPA. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, CCPA is an intimate and diverse group of business owners, executives, and managers looking to build relationships and offer each other meaningful resources. We take pride in bringing you unparalleled access to speakers, decision makers, and leaders who are shaping Center City. We keep our members and guests informed about business challenges and opportunities in Philadelphia. So let's take a minute and touch on the benefits of becoming a member, a sponsor, or collaborating with CCPA. We think it's easiest to remember by being Center City smart. We have signature events where you get the inside scoop on development, sustainability, exceptional women leaders, and the city's movers and shakers. There are marketing opportunities available only to members and sponsors, enabling you to reach thousands of businesses and consumers. You have access to our speakers and panelists in a way few organizations can deliver. The up-close, intimate, and personal experience of a CCPA event is like no other. You can reimagine employee benefits available to members through Penworth Financial Services, and you can take the lead with opportunities to build your network, grow your business, and be a CCPA ambassador. So if you'd like to join today, there's a link posted in the chat. And to mark your calendars for our upcoming events, posted now on your screen, please note our 43rd annual membership meeting and networking breakfast on November 17th at the Museum of the American Revolution. You do not need to be a member to attend, so please come out and celebrate with us. And our next Meet the Developers will be in person on December 8th. For today's event, we encourage you to use the chat to ask questions or comment and to connect with each other. And you can also find a link to today's program there. I'd like to acknowledge our sustaining sponsor and our preferred benefits provider, Michael Craig of Penworth Financial Services. Lunch with City Leaders is made possible by Citizens Bank and our sponsors, the Community College of Philadelphia, Friedman LLP, KYW News Radio, Lev Lane, Pico, Post Brothers, and Visit Philadelphia. Now to say a few words and introduce our speaker, please welcome Dan Fitzpatrick, President of Citizens Bank Mid-Atlantic Region.
Thank you, Suzette. Thank you so much, and really good afternoon, everyone. And again, Citizens is really proud to support this series, and we're glad it's been able to keep it going virtually during this period of time, and really look forward to when we're all back together again. The bottom line is Citizens is all in on Philadelphia. I live and work here in Philadelphia and in my office, and in Philadelphia is such a wonderful place. But the bottom line is, as Citizens, we're all in. We have the most branches in the city of Philadelphia with 40 banking branches, 15 in low to moderate income census tract branches, where we are growing our branch presence in our inner city neighborhoods, which we are proud of. So again, this makes this conversation today with Commissioner Outlaw so important, because we are there in the communities that are suffering so much right now in Philadelphia. But so on behalf of Citizens, just really pleased to do this, and the Center City Proprietors Association, thanks for all you do. Bottom line is, it really is my honor to introduce today's speaker, who has no doubt about it the toughest job in Philadelphia and the most important job in Philadelphia, but we absolutely have the right person for the job in Philadelphia. The plague of gun violence that we're seeing in our inner city neighborhoods is really tragic and putting at risk our most precious resource, which is our young people in North and West Philadelphia and other neighborhoods throughout the city. And that's what we collectively have to come together and support Commissioner Outlaw and the city administration on how can we help on this. But again, Philadelphia Police Commissioner Danielle Outlaw is an experienced and respected law enforcement leader at the helm of the nation's fourth largest police department, which employs more than 6,500 officers and 800 civilians who work to help make Philadelphia a safer city. Commissioner Outlaw is the first African-American woman to lead the Philadelphia Police Department. A believer in the power of connectivity and continued learning, she meets people where they are, engages critics and contributes nationally and internationally to ensure that the department's narratives are accurately told. Her community safety goals are rooted in crime prevention and reduction, organizational excellence, and community engagement and inclusion. You can watch her TED Talk on humanity and authority, where she dispels the belief that the two concepts are contrary in nature and explains how they can and should coexist. Commissioner Outlaw has presented various topics, including race and policing, women in law enforcement, de-escalation and investigation of use of force, and building community relationships after controversy. Trust is what it is all about, right? So prior to taking the helm in Philadelphia, Outlaw was the chief of Portland, Oregon's Bureau of Police. She began her law enforcement career in Oakland, California, where she spent 20 years with the Oakland Police Department. So the commissioner may have been pleased with the Raiders' easy victory over the Eagles last Sunday, but please note her Commissioner Outlaw's full biography is in the program posted in chat. So please join me by waving a warm welcome for Commissioner Outlaw. Please, Commissioner.
Thank you so much, Dan, for that. And I appreciate the warm welcome. It's an absolute honor and pleasure to be with you this afternoon. If we can get the slide deck up, that'd be great. Thanks, Ben.
Okay.
Thank you. We can go to the next slide. So you heard my bio. I'll just spend a couple of moments telling you a little bit about me. That young person in that light blue shirt that you see there is a young police cadet in Oakland, California with the Oakland Police Department. Never in a million years that I think I would land in that role. I've shared with many audiences that law enforcement was not my first profession of choice. I pretty much got dared while I was in high school to be a part of this internship program or a career exploration program with the Oakland Police Department, which is where I'm from, Oakland, California. And I didn't think they would choose me. I was not the typical legacy child in that I had a lot of law enforcement in my family or had positive interactions with law enforcement or police in general growing up. In fact, when I was young, I wasn't involved in a lot of things, but I had family members that were. And I knew that my experiences with the police weren't always favorable. In fact, I didn't see the police as an organization or an entity that I can trust. So when we were young kids playing out in the middle of the street, after school, before school, during the summers or on schoolyards, when we saw the police, we ran. And again, it was because of our own personal experiences. So fast forward, I'm in high school, I get sent to a new high school environment, new peers, and we had to do a career exploration in between semesters. I signed up for this program with the Oakland Police Department, and lo and behold, they selected me. No idea they would select me, but they did. And so for 2 weeks, I had the opportunity to ride, his name was Officer Tim Sanchez. I rode with Officer Sanchez and I saw the human being behind the badge. I learned that there were so much more that we had in common with one another than the things that, you know, society at the time was telling us that, you know, separated us. And so they kind of drew me in. And at the end of these 2 weeks, I quickly learned that not only was there more behind policing, but there were human beings behind policing. And they said, hey, you know, before you leave, we have something called the Explorer program. Are you interested in participating in being an Explorer? And I said, what is that, an Explorer? And they said, well, you meet with kids your age. I was 14, so I say kids your age, high school students. Every Wednesday, there's some cops there, and we just talk about cop stuff. That's how they drew a 14-year-old kid in. But what they were doing was creating a pipeline for those who were from the Oakland, from the city of Oakland, those who may be interested in law enforcement. And then ultimately, we had an opportunity to further see police beyond what we just saw out in the streets as we grew older. And so it was time for me to graduate from high school. I became one of the first in my family to go to college. And they said, wait, we have something else for you. We have something called the Police Cadet Program, which is what that light blue uniform is that you see there. And they said, you do some additional things as, what you did when you were a police explorer. But this time we'll pay you. We'll pay you $10 an hour. It's part-time. You can't work that many hours. But I thought that I was going to be rich. $10 an hour, that was a lot of money for a young kid going into college. But it was allowing me to continue to get out in the community, to volunteer, partner with the Oakland Police Department, and continue to learn. And now I'm receiving training on OPD protocols and policies, procedures, defensive tactics, all these things. So when it came time for me to graduate from college, they said, remember, you always had the police department here. And that's how they got me. Again, never in a million years did I think that I would be sitting here in law enforcement, but because that pipeline was created and I had the opportunity to do that, that's why you see me here today in that bottom right photo as your police commissioner. That middle picture that you see is out at the Rocky statue. It was snowing. It was the first time I think I was able to get out there when there were not a lot of people out, and I was able to get my photo in. So that was me during the touristy thing, because when I first moved here, I got here in February of 2020 after leading the Portland Police Bureau in Portland, Oregon. I was their chief of police, and then I took the job here. But that was me checking off my list of to-do things. And I know that's one of the things people tell you not to do when you move here. Don't do the touristy thing, go to the top of the steps and do this, but that's exactly what I wanted to do. So that's my Philadelphia stamp for me. This quote here from Althea Gibson, no matter what accomplishments you make, somebody helped you, is very important, because I started my career as a single mom with a very young child. And without the support of my family, community, there's no way that I would be sitting in the role that I'm sitting in here today. A lot of things in common with her. She was the first African-American athlete to cross international color lines in the world of tennis. She was also a professional golfer, and there were so many more firsts that came along with that. I've been a first in many things, not just here, but in other agencies, and we can't do these jobs alone. And so I say this to you today, even sitting in this chair, even with the experience that I have, we are not able to do our jobs without people like you. And I just wanted to thank you for that. Next slide, please. Just a quick snapshot of the Philadelphia Police Department. We're one of the oldest municipal police agencies in the country, dating back to 1797. Huge deal. We're the 4th largest municipal police department in the country, and the 6th largest non-federal law enforcement agency. We currently, although we're authorized for 6,380 sworn employees, we're currently at about 5,950. And we have about 800 non-sworn or civilian personnel as well. Regardless where anyone lands here in the department, they're going to end up working for one of the 21 patrol logistics that we have, the 6 detective divisions, or one of the 94 divisions or special units here in the police department. Next slide, please. 2020 was a very challenging year. Again, I got here in early February of 2020, and then less than a month later, there was this thing called the pandemic that we're all aware of now. But because of the pandemic, I immediately had to identify budget cuts. We were pushed to innovate how we did our jobs. We're very hands-on, very interactive, very social, just naturally, because, that's what we do here in law enforcement. We had to quickly figure out how to bring policing into a COVID-effective world. Initially, PPE, or the protective gear that a lot of us wear now, and we speak about very regularly, there were shortages in the beginning. So we found ourselves competing for equipment to do our jobs, not just with other law enforcement in the region or around the country, but also there were hospitals that needed a lot of the same equipment. So very early on, we had to make operational adjustments. And we found ourselves dealing with a lot of uncertainty, illness. There were many deaths. And again, very limited interactions with community. This is a very hands-on profession, and community engagement and inclusion is very important for us, not only for trust building, but to maintain the relationships that were established over many, many, many years. And given that, we didn't have, like a lot of you out there might have had the technology readily available, we didn't have smartphones available for everyone, or webcams that we now use on laptops or on top of our desktop monitors to maintain that interaction. So we very quickly, as we spun into what we now know as COVID-19, it was very isolating in the beginning because we were trying to figure out how we maintained our reach with those in the community and made sure that there was interaction. No secret, there was a lot of civil unrest that was sparked initially with what happened in Minneapolis with the murder of George Floyd. But then we had our own critical incident, and then there were elections. And then we found ourselves in the middle of a narrative around reimagining public safety and what that looked like, and hearing from community about changing expectations of what our roles should be in the public safety realm. There was a lot of dialogue and conversation about what police should and shouldn't do. Should we, or are we automatically criminalizing certain instances when police are called just by our mere presence, especially when there's not a crime committed? A lot of conversation around how we interact with those who are in mental crisis or who are unsheltered. And then how do we defer what typically is done by the police to other agencies, and what happens when other agencies aren't fully prepared to deal with that as we continue to, or as we look into transferring some of what our roles were. We had to find new ways to collaborate with our partner agencies to make sure that we were utilizing our resources in the best way possible to meet the needs of the community. And then we all know this, our homicides and our non-fatal shooting rates shot up. And this isn't just happening here in Philadelphia, it's all over the country. It doesn't matter the size of the agency, but we're all experiencing the same thing. Social media is pivotal, and that's not just in 2020, but for sure in 2020. A lot of things that were happening, whether it's a day-to-day call for service or during some of the civil unrest, was happening in real time. And people's ability to live stream and pretty much control narrative, however they chose to do so, we found ourselves being on the defense even more, as opposed to being proactive like we would like to be. We find ourselves reacting to a lot of what's put on social media, knowing that we can't be everywhere. We also saw that the role of social media drove and is still driving a lot of the violent crime that we're seeing. We also saw that guns and the violation of the Uniform Firearm Act, or you hear us refer to that as VUFA, quite often just skyrocketing. Our VUFA arrests skyrocketed, and last year, in 2020, we recovered almost 5,000 guns, illegally owned crime guns off the street, which was a record number at that time. Next slide, please. In June of 2020, so again, I arrived in February. In June of 2020, I rolled out our strategic plan. And I think initially people thought that I was just going to roll out a plan specifically to address crime. Crime is but one part of it. I was hired to do many things, not just address crime, but to also address some very serious issues that we're seeing here in the police department culturally. At the time, there were issues around sexual harassment, discrimination, the need to hire, not just recruit, but to hire and retain diversity, a lot of internal structural issues that needed to be addressed. Now, don't get me wrong, I tell you, we're one of the oldest police departments in the country. A lot of really good things that we do well, a lot of really good things. But there are some areas identified that needed to be tweaked. And so the purpose of this plan was to not only provide a framework to address crime, but it was also to focus on, next slide, please, three pillars. that we use as our framework or our guiding principles. These aren't in any specific order, but they're all interrelated, and we know we can't have one without the other. Crime prevention and reduction, or crime prevention and violence reduction, I think speaks for itself. Organizational excellence, all things internal. What are we doing internally at the individual level, all the way up through the organizational level to ensure that we're setting ourselves up for success? How do we get optimal performance? How are we shifting away? So those of us, in law enforcement, it's a pretty paramilitaristic culture. So there's a lot of focus on hierarchy, a lot of focus on disciplinary systems. But how I want to shift that. How are we shifting our culture so that we're more of a performance culture? And we're focusing on the things we want to see. We're rewarding the behavior and the performances that we want to see, as opposed to relying heavily on discipline in order to modify behavior to get where we want to be. So ultimately, organizational excellence is just that. What are our policies doing to shift culture? How are we ensuring that we're promoting the right people? How do we have the right people in the right seats? Are we marketing when we're talking about recruiting? Are we still showing videos where we're rappelling down buildings and hopping out of helicopters and have all the cool toys out? That's part of what we do, but it's a very small part of what we do. How are we letting people know outwardly that, no, you too can do this job? Whether you were a single mother initially, like I was, or this is your second career, maybe your third, you were a teacher, you were a social worker, you have lived experience, things that draw from your interpersonal skills, all the things that we want you to have here that makes you very unique here in law enforcement, because the majority of this job is all about how we communicate with people. All the other things will teach you, right? What's the training that we're providing to ensure that we're adapting with the changing needs, not only of the community, but of technology, the political landscapes, the environment just in general? Technology, again, we talked about that. How are we keeping up? And then equipment. How are we ensuring that we have the best of the best equipment so that, because we know the types of interactions that we're dealing with now and that we're having, we're most prepared? That's, that's a conversation we can have for another 30 minutes or for another day. But when we dealt with civil unrest, equipment needs or gaps were identified pretty early on. So organizational excellence is, how are we setting ourselves up to thrive? How are we recognizing, acknowledging, rewarding the behavior and the performance that we want to see? That one time that we all unfortunately may or may not have to call the police, that's a first impression there. And was that the absolute best service that you got, right? Hopefully you'll never have to call the police again, but you want to walk away and say, that was A+ service. And that was, even though I was at my lowest, maybe it was the best service that I got. That's organizational excellence. And then community engagement and inclusion. We hear a lot of people talking about how we go out and engage, right? I can go and speak at you all day. Preferably that's, that's not my thing. But okay, we're engaging, but what are we doing to include our community stakeholders in our business processes? Are you in our hiring process? Are you sitting on our oral assessments when we're promoting folks? Do you have any say in our policy? Through our advisory councils or our advisory committees in the districts, are you offered the opportunity and empowered to actually say, no, this is what I think. This is what works best for this district. It might work over there, but that doesn't really work over here. And are we saying, you know what, we hear you, and we're incorporating that feedback? In order to prevent crime and reduce crime, we need witnesses to come forward. If we're not out engaging and including community, how can we expect people to do that, right? How can we expect crime to go down or even prevent it if we don't give our folks the tools to do that? So as you can see there, they're all interrelated. It's a cycle, and everything that we do fall under these three pillars. Next slide, please. So moving forward in 2021, we know that all the things that we said, we knew were an issue. And so we were very intentional with saying, okay, here are some of the things that we learned in 2020. 2021, let's step it up, get our A game together, and move with intention. You see a lot of these photos are us outdoors. 2020 was pretty much spent virtually. I didn't get the opportunity, as I have in past lives. When you're onboarded, you're typically out and about. I think I was forced for the first 7 months I was in Portland because I was out interacting, engaging, getting to know folks, allowing people to get to know me. But all of that was shut down when the pandemic hit, which was essentially when I first got here. And so these photos are showing us out and about because we recognize that those connections and those warm touch points still had to take place. Next slide, please. This slide I usually start with when I'm speaking just about crime. This slide here shows how, and I'm making a transition here, we're talking about crime. This slide shows that how since 2014, our homicides and our shooting victims have continued to increase. So whether people knew this or not, the increase didn't start when the pandemic hit. The increase didn't start when I got here, quite frankly. The increase we've been seeing since 2014. At the end of 2020, our homicide and our shooting victims were up 39% and 53% respectively when compared to the previous year in 2019. And when you look at year-to-date 2021, we're still seeing that the trend is continuing, although we're starting to see steady declination. So as of now, our homicides are up 13% and our shooting victims are up by 8%. If we were having this conversation back in July, I would have reported to you that our homicides were up around 33%. And even prior to that, it was in the 40s. So we're starting to see it slowly decline. But again, because we had those really early spikes, the numbers are still typically high. When you look at the right side of the screen here, what this is showing us is that, and I talked about VUFA earlier, the Violation of Uniform Firearm Act arrests. What this chart is showing you on the right side is that our firearm possession arrests are tracking along with our homicides and our shooting victims. So this is telling us that all these guns that we're seeing on the street are leading to more victims, to more shooting victims. Next slide, please. There is a little bit of bright light. I'm cautiously optimistic. The numbers are still high, but I want to share this because again, we're starting to see a steady declination. And so when you look at 2021, just over the last, when you're comparing previous weeks, right? As of right now, or through the 24th of October, we're seeing a 6% citywide decline in our homicides and 8% decline or decrease in our shooting victims. And when you look at our pinpoint areas, and I'll talk about that in a minute, which of our areas of focus are our grids under our overarching strategy, our homicides are down 46% and our shooting victims are down 10%. I like to say green means good, red is bad. I follow this daily and there's typically some red squares in here, but for today, green is good. Next slide, please. There's a lot of information on this slide. I won't go through all of it, but this is our crime plan, our specific crime plan in a nutshell. This is our operating framework. When I got here, we're really great at collecting data and data analysis. We have some very intelligent analysts on board. We got that down, but we were communicating in silos and not just internally, but with our law enforcement partners from other agencies. And I sat back and I said, does anybody see what's going on here? We're all working towards the same goals, but we're working alone. We knew that there was overlap with PHA properties. We knew that there was overlap with SEPTA properties or issues with our transit hubs. We knew that there's overlap in our university jurisdictions as well. How are we communicating to ensure that we're all focusing on the same areas? Because we know there's specific areas in the city that's driving the largest amount of crimes, but then there's also individuals or small groups of individuals that are also driving the largest proportion of crimes here. And so this is part of the June 2020 plan. I established 7 goals very specifically as it relates to crime, 3 of which have already been met. The first one was around establishing an operating model, which is what we now have here, that incorporates our district priorities. So everyone, again, knows what the left hand, the right hand, they're communicating. Everybody knows what we're doing. We have district weekly priorities. We now have weekly shooting reviews where all of our partners, local, state law enforcement and federal law enforcement partners are meeting every Tuesday morning, every Tuesday morning to review the shootings that happened in the previous week. And if there are any resource needs or any deliverables, we're all walking out of those meetings knowing what our marching orders are before we leave that meeting. The second goal was to expand our pinpoint areas. So the Philadelphia Roadmap for Safer Communities is the overarching strategy that the city of Philadelphia implemented back in 2018. Operation Pinpoint is how the Philadelphia Police Department implements this or operationalizes the city's strategy. So when you hear us talking about grids in pinpoint areas, grids are those areas identified through district leadership through the use of data and intelligence that tells us we got to focus on this area. They're driving up the shootings, they're driving up, or whatever it is, but typically it's the most violent areas in that specific part of the city. When I arrived here, we didn't have the citywide coverage or district-wide coverage that we now have. That's since been expanded with added logistical support, including intelligence analysts to ensure that they have support there. We also have the goal here, and you see they're not checked because they haven't been met. We want to reduce our homicides in our pinpoint areas by 25%. We want to reduce the number of our shooting victims. And we also want to increase our homicide clearance rates by the end of 21, as well as our non-fatal victim clearance rates by the end of 2021. We have not met those goals yet. And then we established a very clear referral notification from us to the tactical team, the Philadelphia Roadmap for Safer Communities tactical team, which is the services side run through the managing director's office. When we identify individuals that are most at risk of being shot or being a shooter, if they're a one-off, if this is somebody where that we believe can benefit from intervention from social services, we now have a formalized system in place to refer them. I say all of this to say, again, all is not lost. I'm not going to go through all of these on the left-hand side of the screen, but if you take a moment there, not only have we achieved some of our goals here, but we're seeing reductions in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 districts, very significant reductions to show that this plan is working. And so when folks say, well, shooting, the crimes are still up, how do you know what you're doing is working? This is what tells me. Because if we get wins in our districts, we know that citywide, we're going to chip away at that number. Just look at this, right? 14th district, 20% reductions in shooting victims and 42% reductions in homicides. Jumping up to the first district, we're seeing a 45% reduction in shooting victims, and they're flat in their homicides. I'm saying all this to say we're getting some quick wins. And if we keep at it and we slowly chip away at it, I think over time, because this didn't happen overnight, remember we've been dealing with this since 2014, over time, we're going to see some long-term sustainable reductions, and that's what we want. Next slide, please. I'll briefly just go over this. I won't go over all the colors and the numbers, but this slide is telling us, again, the number of guns that we're getting off the street. When I told you last year that we recovered almost 5,000, if we continue on at the pace where we're on now, we'll be at over 6,000 guns recovered. It's record breaking. Again, I'm having this conversation with my colleagues all over the country. We're all scratching our heads. The state of Pennsylvania, it's very easy to get guns here. People want to know, well, where are the guns coming from? They're regional. So while we're not seeing a lot of gun trafficking, there may be some guns coming in from the Georgia area or maybe Virginia. A lot of the guns are coming here from the region, whether it's through straw purchasing, where someone who can legally go to a gun show or to a gun shop and purchase a gun, they then turn around and sell or give these guns to people who cannot legally possess guns. And then we're also seeing a proliferation of privately made firearms. And those are unserialized, untraceable, or you may also hear the term ghost gun. It's where you or I, any of us, can go online and purchase parts of a firearm, get a kit, go home, put it together. Now you have a gun. There's no serial number. There's no way to trace it. And we're seeing an increased number of these guns used in the crimes that are being committed also. Next slide, please. We established the Kensington Police District at the beginning of the year. I won't read all of these words on this slide, but they too have been successful. And we established this was well underway prior to my arrival, but we made sure it was up and running off the ground once I got here, because narcotics, social media beefs, some domestics, and again, guns, we saw were driving a lot of our crimes back from 2020. A lot of the narcotics sales are stemming from this area. And so already with establishing the new Kensington Police District, again, 1 lieutenant, 2 sergeants, 38 officers within these boundaries, they've seen an overall decrease in violent crime. And again, most notable reduction in their shooting victims in their ag assaults with a firearm. So again, I won't go through all of this, but again, we know this is working. In addition with them working with our East District folks, narcotics folks, we're really starting to chip away at that, and we're happy about that. Next slide, please. Again, I won't read all of this, but 2021, it's not all about crime. A lot of things that we have working behind the scenes. Of course, crime is at the utmost forefront, but we're doing a lot of things at once. Gone are the days where I think police commissioners, chiefs, superintendents, public safety directors can only focus on one thing at a time. We are juggling multiple plates at once. We got a lot of stuff in the air, but we recognize, given everything that we've gone through, what I didn't mention was within my first month of me being here, Corporal James O'Connor was murdered, in addition to all the other things that happened. And so officer safety and wellness is at the forefront for us. It's very huge, the need to prioritize, because we've all been through a lot in the last year and a half. And again, how can you expect happy, high performing employees when their well-being isn't being addressed? We rolled out training, something called the active bystandership for law enforcement training. We were one of the early adopters. I am a fan of getting ahead of something and being preemptive before the feds come in and make you do it. But it was made very clear, not just culturally, but after what happened in Minneapolis, we needed to start focusing on the benefits of what happens when you intervene. So ABLE is focusing on the duty to intervene, and not in a punitive way, but this is how we save our people before we send them to internal affairs. And we all know, we think the best accountability happens at the peer-to-peer level, and that's what that training focuses on. We hired an executive in residence to follow up or to actually project lead, project manage a lot of our transformation efforts here. I'm still seeking to hire a diversity, equity, and inclusion officer here for the department. It's not a common role in law enforcement. I can think of at least 3 other agencies that have this position, but it's very important. Of course, we're not corporate, we're not in the private sector, but we still have a lot of the same issues and challenges that the private sector does. And I think that bringing this person on that would be a direct report to me would help us in a lot of the DEI areas. We also rolled out implicit bias training, and I'm seeking to implement, now that we have funding, thank you to the Police Foundation, an early intervention system. A lot of the public media, when we are on the news and we're talking about an officer involved shooting or a critical incident, sometimes you may see the same officer's name or face come up time and time again. And some folks may scratch their heads and say, why is it that these same officers are getting away with the same thing? This is what an early intervention system will help us do. It helps us identify risk before it turns into something really bad, but it also helps us identify the good performance that we want to see at the individual level up through the organizational level, and allows us to identify what's leading to that and replicate that throughout the organization. So I'm excited about that. I talked about some of these other ones. It's self-explanatory, but there's also a huge emphasis for me, for the department, on protocol and partnerships. We've done a lot of organizational assessments with the help of either academic partners, corporate partners, to help us get an idea whether or not we're on the right track or if we need to make some adjustments and tweaks. Next slide, please. I bring up this slide because we're partnering with Ready, Set, Philly. There was a lot of conversation around, well, you know, what happens when kids go back to school? And we focused a lot of our energy and our effort around safe corridors, safe passages to and from school for our young people. But then we realized it's time for people to start coming back to work also. And so we wanted to make sure not only that we had a seat at the table in this conversation, but to ensure that just like we had a very intentional focus on returning to school, that we had an intentional focus on returning to work. So we partnered with Ready, Set, Philly to not only ensure that there was collaboration with Commerce and City of Philadelphia and our employers, but to make sure that we heard very specifically from businesses, not only when they were planning on reopening, but also what some of the corridors of concern were, in the same way we do with schools. And so our end operationally ensures that there's safe passage during certain hours. And so what you see here is that certain locations here, 8th to 20th, Locust Street to JFK Boulevard, and then some focus in Old City. These were the areas that were identified to be patrolled by our 6th and 9th and our city center district officers. There's an established liaison to ensure that this goes off without a hitch. But what this is for us is increased visibility. And it's not just us, it's not just marked PPD vehicles, but it's also SEPTA. It's the sheriff's office, it's Aramark, it's Jefferson Hospital, it's the universities, it's Port Authority, to ensure that we're all sharing the same data, we're all covering those areas of overlap, but to ensure that there is not only a stationary presence, but a transient presence as well, also with the use of motorcycles and mounted patrol, bicycles, you name it. So that's what this is. Again, it's very collaborative, and I'm pleased in that I've heard a lot of reporting back on people happy to see the increased visibility in the Center City area. Next slide, please. And I'll wrap it up with this. You know, a lot of folks, and I appreciate this question, they say, well, what can we do to help? Because 2021, again, not only is it about moving with intention, but it's about solutions. We're all sick and tired of just sitting around the table and either venting or throwing ideas out there, but there's no follow-up. And so typically this is what I would say. Right off the bat, I share this, I say, please, please, please know that it's okay to publicly support us. And we need that at this time. It's okay to publicly support us, but it's also okay to hold us accountable at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive. And what we're hearing more and more is that we want more cops. We want to see more cops. I just want to be treated with dignity and respect when I do see these cops. I want these cops, these officers, to get out of their cars. I want them to get out on their feet, get to know who's in their neighborhoods. Again, communicate and treat people with dignity and respect. And for me, I'm like, okay, that's easy, that's low-hanging fruit. But what's happening over the last few years is that I would hear people kind of whisper, hey, you're doing a good job. Or tell officer such and such they're doing a good job. And I'll intentionally lean in and go, I'm sorry, what'd you say? And it's because they didn't feel comfortable in saying it publicly. And I would like to get back to a time and a space and a place where we can continue to uplift our officers who are doing a really good job, but then also still feel comfortable to hold us accountable and call us out on our stuff when we mess up. So I want to stress that. I think partnerships are important. Public-private partnerships are very, very important, whether it's through executive development or any trainings that you offer, or even a community engagement initiative or event. If you know you're going to have something, or you know we're going to have something, say, hey, would you like to partner on this? We love to do things like that because we recognize that our communities go beyond just our residential communities. You know, there's commercial communities as well that I think would benefit, whether it's through their employers or employees, to know what's going on in their police departments so they feel safe. Same thing, participate in our initiatives, projects, programs. And then social media support. If you see that we've posted something giving kudos or an attaboy, attagirl to one of our officers or to a group or to a unit, please feel free to retweet it, repost it, and say, hey, good job. That means a lot and it goes a long way. It's kind of like, when your parents, I used to say when my mom told me I did a good job, I'm like, yeah, okay. But if I went outside of my house and one of my teachers or someone who I didn't know recognized the same thing that I did, for some reason, it had a lot more credence. And of course, I love my mom and appreciated the support, but it just means a little bit extra. We don't do these jobs for pleases and thank yous, but when we get it from strangers or from our partners, it means that much more. I'd also say, if you have a camera, register your camera with our SafeCam program. That's the website right there, safecam.phillypolice.com. And what this does, when you go to this address or this website, it allows you, if you so choose, to register your camera with us. So one, we know that your camera exists. And if something happens in any particular area, we can go to our registry and say, okay, we know that there's potentially footage for this crime that occurred here or whatever it is. Again, it's not Big Brother watching you. We're not, streaming through your cameras and, watching your neighborhoods all the time. But it's an added tool for us to let us know where potential evidence may be. And then lastly, I would say, if you're up to it, I know we're all very busy people, serve on an advisory board. All of our districts have what's called a PDAC, or a Police District Advisory Council or a committee. And that's where you can go. And, sometimes we see a lot of the same people in these groups, but I would love representation just across the board for you to come provide your own perspective, what your experiences are, whether through your professional experience or just your lived experience, and say, here's what's going on in my district, and here's what I think needs to be done, and here's what I think I can contribute to help, whether it's time or resources or whatever that is. So those are some great ways to support the police department. And with that, we'll move to the next slide. I will open it up for any questions that you have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Outlaw, for your remarks and such an excellent presentation. My name is Cassie Tompkins, and I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff for Visit Philadelphia, which many of you know is the region's official tourism marketing agency. Visit Philadelphia is a proud sponsor of these important conversations that CCPA has been hosting between city officials and business leaders. It's my pleasure and honor to moderate this Q&A session. So if anyone has questions, please post them in the chat or raise your virtual hand. I've been noticing some questions coming through, and I've been making some notes of them. So I'm happy to lead us off with a question for you, Commissioner Outlaw. Since the beginning of COVID-19, health and safety have become more important to our visitors and tourists. What are some reasons that we can assure travelers that they can feel safe visiting Philadelphia?
Well, thank you for that question. I think just the data that I shared with you just now, I think is evident of the fact that, what we're doing is working. We all know that strategies are long-term, and there's, just recently we've seen the desire for whatever pressures and just our own innate, we all deserve to be safe. We want to feel safe. It's a basic human need, right? And I would just say, don't go with the knee-jerk reaction of saying, well, because we don't see something right away, it's not working. I would say that. We do know what works and what doesn't work. And we do know that our strategy is working. We have increased our visibility in a lot of our key corridors. And the good news for that is, and it's not just with schools, it's, in our center city areas as well, and some of our other commercial corridors. The good news with that is that while we may not be able to always deter or prevent by our mere presence, because we've seen that, we respond a lot quicker. We've been able to get people in custody right away. We've been able to get guns from said persons right away, which could have deterred or prevented even more. So I would just say, stick with us, but there's a lot of hard work that's been taking place behind the scenes strategically to ensure that we have the right people in the right place and then also making sure that we can get ahead. I will also say this, the caveat is this, and I know a lot of people don't like to hear this, is that, you know, when I shared with you that we had a little bit over 6,300 people authorized to work here, that number is different, and these are officers. That number is different than when I first got here. We had an authorized strength of 6,500, you know, upon my arrival here. And our authorized budget, our strength was cut and it was not restored. So in addition to that, we have about 1,000 people that are out on leave for various reasons, whether it's long-term injury, illness, restricted duty, or detailed to a lot of the task forces, federal or state task forces that are really, really beneficial in getting a lot of these large, you know, criminal cartels off the street, these guns, narcotics. So there's a need for us to detail these people out. But I say all of that to say, we don't unfortunately have many cadres or reserves of officers standing by where we can just say, okay, well, you go now deal with this. We're addressing a lot of the issues that we're seeing pop up, whether it's ATV or dirt bikes, or, you know, whatever it is at that time on overtime. And we also have to be mindful that we're not wearing out the same people over and over again. Football season has started. We have security at the stadium. So again, it's not like we have thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people that at any time that, you know, can be deployed. So we have to be very strategic with how we deploy, not only based off of data and intelligence, but we have to, you know, utilize key personnel for key areas. So I say all of that to say, there are a lot of very smart people that work here. We're not just kind of throwing bodies at a problem. It's very thoughtful, very problem solving oriented. And I'm happy that I think we have some very smart people at the table.
Thank you so much. That's really reassuring and also really insightful for all of us here. I did want to turn it to Councilman Alan Dom is here on the call, and I know he has a question, so I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thanks for having this event. And thank you, Commissioner, for your remarks today. And let me just say this, I've worked with Commissioner Outlaw since she came here in February of 2020. It's not easy for someone from the outside to come into the Philadelphia Police Department from the outside. That's not an easy job. And I will say this, Commissioner, you've done an excellent job, and I'm a supporter. And I've watched how you work with all law enforcement. We need to tell more people about that, whether it's the U.S. Attorney's Office or Attorney General, FBI, ATF, even the District Attorney. Commissioner Outlaw is collaborating with everybody. And I'll just share with you, I think, Ben, for Center City proprietors, the more positive information the members can put out about these crime statistics going down, the better it will be for the whole community. Because I do think in general that the violence that occurred at the end of May have done more damage than the pandemic for businesses in Center City. So the more we put out positive, I think the better it is. I just want to share with you, Commissioner, you may not know this, but on Friday night from 6 to 10 p.m., I did a ride along in the 24th Police District up in Kensington. I was with Sergeant Spicer, and he took me to the new outpost in Kensington and met several police officers. Impressed with all of them, the teamwork. I actually was in the front seat. They had me put on a bulletproof vest, and fortunately, I wasn't didn't really need it, but I'm glad I had it. And watched 3 arrests. The teamwork of your officers was amazing, very impressive. I remember this. I think it was Tim Steffens, maybe a Sergeant Steffens. Amazing. Made 2 arrests within a half hour. Stolen vehicles, and these guys did an amazing job. I posted all over social media how impressed I am with the Philadelphia Police Department. You guys did amazing. We all should be talking about that because our officers need that. They need our support. So thank you, Commissioner. I'm a supporter. Appreciate you being here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
So we thank you both. We had a few questions coming in throughout the presentation, and one of the earliest questions was related to Commissioner Outlaw. You mentioned that you were part of a career exploration program. And one of the questions that came in was, does the Philadelphia PD have a similar career exploration program? And also, is there a way for us to help refer teens who might be interested in a career in law enforcement?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. Go to ppdexplorers.com or phillypolice.com to learn more. But we have an Explorers program. You have to be between the ages of 14 to 20. You have to get parental permission if you're under 18, have no arrests or convictions that would actually keep you from becoming an actual officer. And then last weekend, I was here with our rollout of our new Youth Advisory Commission. Again, all of that information is on phillypolice.com, but I am a firm believer and a cheerleader and an advocate of creating a pipeline. I've also directed my staff to work with the community college so that we can find a way so people can get credits if they go through the police academy, college credits, if they are hired here. So I'm a firm believer of that. Yes, we do. Also check out PPD at PPD Explorers on Twitter as well. Communities are best recruiters.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This question comes in from Jane Green. Currently, there's an additional deployment of police in Center City. And given the importance of helping the business corridors to recover, will there be an additional deployment extended throughout the holiday shopping season?
Yes, so initially we said, depending on how things worked, that operation or that detail would be in place through the end of November. But what we're seeing, and after speaking with more and more businesses, there's a desire for this to extend. So that's likely what we're going to do. We didn't take resources from other parts of the city. We reallocated the resources that already existed in that part of town. And so for me to be able to say, yes, we can extend is a little bit easier because we're not drawing from, from other critical areas. So the likelihood of it extending through the holidays or beyond the holidays are very high.
That's great news. Thank you. And I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. We had a question in the chat. You mentioned that you're increasing the number of guns recovered. Once those guns are recovered, where do they go?
They go to, so we have an office of a nice crime lab that's not big enough. We're hoping with some work of some others that at some point with funding, we can expand, but we have a very, very capable team over there in our crime lab that does all things of forensics. We have a gun unit there. Typically, if we recover a gun, it's entered into a system to determine if it was used as test fire, to determine if those casings match to any others that were possibly used anywhere else. We want to make sure that, again, if the gun was used in just this one incident, if we could link it to others. So there's a lot of, I would say, we look at evidence now in different ways. Back in the day when the lab was created, labs were generated so that they were preparing cases to go to court. That's all it was. Now we are shifting and recognizing that the evidence that we recover has more of a use in helping us solve crimes and could potentially link to others. So while we do hold on to some of the guns, we tend to destroy them once there's no longer a need for them, but they go through a very rigorous process to determine if they were used elsewhere or associated with any other individuals, not just here in the city, region, in the country. And we go from there, and we partner very closely with the alcohol, tobacco, firearms, with the ATF as well on that.
Thank you so much. And I think we have time for one more question. So I just wanted to ask, there was a question about Philadelphia police officers and whether there is a mandate for them to have a Philadelphia residence. And is there any evidence to say that this helps in big cities having a residency requirement?
This might get me in trouble. You're gonna get me in trouble.
Oh boy. I didn't mean to.
I've answered this question before. It didn't go over very well, but thank you for that. So currently, any new hires, in order to be eligible to work heck, in the city, you have to, or for the police department, you had to have lived in the city for at least 1 year. That's for new hires. Currently, prior to this, Philadelphia cops had to live in the city for the first 5 years. And then after that, now that, you know, they can move anywhere outside of the city. I have not found research that supports either way, quite honestly, that having a residency requirement makes a better police force. I mean, it's this, you can find a white paper almost anywhere on either side, quite frankly. But depending, this is my third state that I've worked in. You know, it varies just depending on where you are, regardless if there's a residency requirement or not. I think it's important for department leadership to ensure, because, you know, you can have some people that are from the city but have lived in an isolated shell, right? Or maybe in a suburb of the city and don't have any idea what goes on in some of the inner city areas. I think it's important for any leader to ensure that there's exposure. And that starts in the academy. When I first got here, I hopped out of the car. I was doing my own tour of the city. And I hopped out of the car and met up with a recruit class who was doing a walking tour of the Kensington area. It's important for them to be exposed, all of us, to be exposed to lifestyles that may differ from what we come from, to other cultures, to other ethnicities, to understanding that some people may communicate differently culturally. It doesn't mean just because I'm yelling that I'm mad, whatever it is, right? It's important to have that exposure. And for us, that starts in the academy, whether you're from here or not.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Outlaw. We're so grateful to have you here today. And I'm going to turn it over to Ben Frank from CCPA.
Thanks, Cassie. Commissioner, thank you so much for your time and the presentation. We're glad you could all attend today. We do need to allow her to get back to work. We have a lot of questions that were in the chat that were unanswered, and we will try to get those answered. You can also send a question to police.public_affairs@phila.gov. So we'll get back to everybody with that, and probably the slide deck and the recording. So thanks again for coming, for all of our sponsors and attendees, for enjoying our last lunch with the city's leaders for this season. And we'll see you all soon, hopefully in person, in a safe, happy city. So thanks for coming and take care.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Commissioner. Thank you.
Thank you.